Hello, everyone. It's Kent Stones of Stones Insight and of the community Fake Not. Fake Not is a community of business professionals who are really working to build sustainable brands in this era of what I call fake everything. And these are just a series of interviews that we're doing to talk to people who have a particular expertise or have done a phenomenal job of learning how to communicate in this era. And so today, I am really, really lucky to have my guest as Stefan Mumaw. And Stephen is a storyteller, an author, a creative director. We've worked together in the past on a number of projects, sometimes at the same company, sometimes independently, but have always just found a very good collaboration. And I'm excited to have him talk about storytelling today on the show. So, Stefan, good to have you on.
Good to see you, Kent. What's going on?
Hey, not too much. Had an amazing holiday. It was a really great weekend. It was yours?
Oh, it was fantastic. Went to my brother's. My brother's a bit of a chef. So all major holidays are over at his house because he makes such amazing food. So as it normally was, it's full of food and sitting around, getting accustomed to eating that much food all at once. So, but it was fantastic. It was great.
I think I've found there's a couple of very interesting skills that you need to make sure, and not that you have any choice in your family, but you can encourage these skills in the development of your siblings or your children. And, one of them I think is cooking so having a chef in the family. The other, I would say, and I'm really lucky, is my daughter is a physical therapist. So,
so every holiday it's, hey, this hurts.
Exactly. Yeah. It's pretty nice. And especially in my 50s now, where the things in your body just aren't working as well as they used to. That's often very helpful.
I actually get both out of my brother. So my brother, the chef part is just what he does on the side. For many, many years, he was a head athletic trainer at Cal State Fullerton. So I get both in the context of one guy.
Man, you can't beat that. Well,
no.
One of the really cool things. It's really marvelous when you're able to be around family and everything. But every once in a while, I think you find that you have to spend a holiday not with your extended family. And it's always difficult, I think, for people to do that. But and so I had one of those weekends this weekend where it was like, I was on my own. And I found it is so remarkable, though, when you open yourself up to allowing yourself to just go meet different people, do different things, all that. And I met two of the most amazing people this weekend. One was she was a retired attorney, but she was really instrumental in the 80s in having mediation become a primary form of interaction between people who had a dispute, as opposed to immediately going to court. And they had found that the arbitration also wasn't being very effective. So this whole concept of mediation, and what I loved about it, she started talking about how you build trust. And, and it's one of those stories that tells you about the universality of human nature,
sure.
In no matter what situation. So that was cool. But then the other really cool person I met, I was at a client and colleagues yesterday. She had invited me over for dinner, and her parents were there and her neighbors, and her father was one of the most interesting people because he was instrumental he was very involved in the early development of the mixed martial arts movement here in the United States.
Wow.
And so he was talking about how that was coming in as a very young man, and he was involved in that. It was very informal, how it became more formal. And but what I loved is he actually gave a demonstration, and he was just showing how it's very scientific. And a lot of times we think it's mystical or spiritual or martial arts, but it's physics. Wow. it was but it was pretty cool. But I digress.
Now you can beat people up, is what you're saying.
Well, at least I learned the study I need to take. Yes, because I'm such a threatening individual.
Yeah. When I think of somebody beating me up, the first person I think of is so
yeah. Thanks so much for talking today. And I know one of the things that we talked about before we jumped on here was just, we're in this very different era, and politics aside, I think you could argue that this has probably been coming for a while, but with social media, and what I call fake everything, where in this day and age you can fake news, you can fake identities, you can fake video, you can fake audio, and it's indistinguishable from reality. So I thought it would be really interesting to talk with you. First, before we jump into that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on just developing a good story, because we hear this all the time now, right? Develop story, content marketing, content. And I liken it to when a lot of the tools came out to be able to develop websites, and there was 1 million websites, and everyone said build websites, but very few of them are any good.
That's correct.
and I would argue to this day, there's still just a small spectrum that are actually really good. So in that light, where everybody's talking about content marketing, everyone says they're telling stories. I've seen you develop some remarkable stories. So what are your thoughts, and how do you go about storytelling?
Well, I mean, everyone says that they're a storyteller. The problem is that they're right. That's the thing, right? We are all just innately human. We're all storytellers. We all construct our days. We understand and comprehend the passage of time through the context of story, because it provides analogy. It provides foundation. It provides context when context wasn't there, right? I can tell you what I had for breakfast this morning. That doesn't mean that you're going to care about what I had for breakfast this morning, right? So, if you think about it just in purely a social capacity, in our social feeds, we are confronted with thousands and thousands of stories constantly. How come we don't watch every one? How come we don't stop at every story and take in what that story is, read it or listen to it or watch it? Well, because that story in that moment isn't relevant to us. Some stories are and some stories aren't. I think it's really interesting about from a behavioral standpoint, what stories do we stop on? And why do we stop on those stories? Why do we take in those stories? So much of it has to do with our particular worldview, the way that we see the world, our cultural systems, as you would put it, right? The things that make us up as humans, personally and individually. But from a story standpoint, there are things that we can do to make our stories more relevant to the people that are watching them or listening to them or hearing to them. I talk a little, like for instance, when I could describe to you what I had for breakfast, and technically that's a story. That doesn't make it a good story. So how do we make something a good story? It's a really simple formula. Story has a very simple formula, and it's structure plus emotion. That's really the only two things that story needs: structure and emotion. And people don't naturally gravitate to the idea of structure in the context of story, because stories can literally be anything. But really good stories, they do have a structure. There's a structure that's playing out. That doesn't mean that there's a template that's playing out, but that there is a structure that's there that we as humans innately see and understand without us ever recognizing it visibly or audibly. But there's something there that for us as humans, as we're comprehending what we're being told or what we're seeing, allows us to fill in the gaps of what's missing. Every story can't tell you every single piece, but there are certain things that can allow us to understand the context of the story. Most narratives have a structure to them, right? So if you go to a movie, almost all movies have a structure that's playing out in that narrative. And those structures can be really complex, or they can be very simple. I can communicate them to you very complex and very simple. So I'll give you a really simple 5-part narrative structure. Starts with exposition. What's the time and place, the characters, so I get an understanding of where I'm supposed to be understanding the story from. So that's exposition. All stories have an inciting incident, because all stories innately are about change. And change as humans, in most cases, change has to be forced upon us. We resist change. And so an inciting incident is change that's instituted into the story in some way, whether that's personal, internal, or external to the character. Then you've got rising action. Whenever an inciting incident comes into play, you have a goal that's been established, and our rising action is the coming to the meeting of that goal, whether or not that goal will be met. And then there's the climax. This is when the whole story comes together. Will that goal be met? And then there's resolution. All stories have resolution. All goal setting and either meeting or not meeting has a consequence to it. So that's a simple 5-part story structure. But inside of a marketing world, we say to ourselves, well, I don't have that much time. I gotta tell a little 15-second video, or I gotta put out a print ad, or I gotta use a billboard, or I don't have time to go through a 5-part story structure. And inside of a marketing world, you can distill down that 5-part structure to a really simple, what I call a 2-world structure. There's the world that is, and then there's the world that could be. Your brand is the conduit between those 2 worlds. And you can either show the world that is and how your brand turns it into the world that could be, or you can show the world that could be and how your brand converted it or transformed it from the world that is. But you have these 2 worlds with your brand in between. Now, it doesn't have to be the complete world. It could be a much smaller piece of that world. But if you can show that, what you'll find is that 5-part narrative structure lays right over the top of it. So that's the structural part. But then you also have the emotional part. All great stories incite emotion, and the best stories, they incite a very authentic emotion.
That's the one thing that just really struck me as you were talking through that was, I think what I discover is so many business people want a formula that, and I want to give me step 1 through 5, and I will follow that step 1 through 5 every single time. We'll do it efficiently and effectively, and that's our whole goal. Instead, I love what you're talking about. Is there's a structure, but you know what? You don't have to follow it in that kind of like stepwise fashion.
That's right.
Which is I think what you see why there's so many just noisy stories out there.
Yeah, large and massive. Really large stories, right? I mean, if you think about it, I always go back to the movies because I love the movies. But you see all these stories about one man for the fate of all humanity. They're these giant, massive stories, right, that have to be told. Yeah. But the ones that affect us, the ones that are incredibly relevant and very personal, are really small stories. I think brands have a tendency to want to tell the totality of their story, everything. When really you only need one part. And if you understand what that one part is, you can just tell that one part really well, and people will fill in the rest.
So I think here's a really important lesson, though. As a brand, you need to know what that whole story is.
That's correct.
Right? And so you have to tell that story internally and know it yourself.
That's right.
And then you can choose, okay, how do we tell this part of it? But then think about the context of the rest of it. And is what we're telling here fit with the rest of the context? And then that forces you to think about the other things you're doing. And maybe we need
and how a story plays out, right? I mean, we don't have to use a single medium to tell the entirety of our story. We can use a medium that tells that's unique to that particular part of the story, and let the rest of the story play out in other places where people come to you instead of you having to come to them.
I love that. So you then talked about and the emotional part of it and the authenticity. This is the area, the second area I wanted to talk about today, which is so with all these stories out there, and it's so hard for people to believe in the truth of what's being told, or afraid there's going to be some gotcha behind it. What have you found has helped you in terms of getting of people feeling those stories are authentic or they're believable?
Yeah. So marketers have a obstacle to overcome immediately, because every person who's watching your story knows innately that your purpose, your reason for telling the story is selfish. You're trying to change their behavior. Most people from a marketing standpoint aren't going to spend the money and the time to develop stories that have no personal or brand implications, right? So you're already sort of overcoming the idea of manipulation, especially when we're dealing with emotion. Emotion is where manipulation kind of comes in. Are you making me feel something that I don't want to feel for your benefit, not for mine, right? It's a very fine line, but the easiest way for us to overcome that from a marketing standpoint is to recognize that all stories have to be authentic emotionally, but they have to be authentic to both us and them. They have to be authentic to both the brand, so that it's when somebody associates that emotion with the brand, they don't see it as manipulative. They see it as congruent with who that brand is from a value standpoint. But it also has to be authentic to the user, to the viewer, that it's something that they would normally feel in that situation. And there are some brands that do it better than others. And what they usually requires of us is to what I call coming up the ladder. It's us telling a high enough story that the emotions that we're inciting are authentic to who our users are, that they're timely, because our emotions change, right? They change both from a time standpoint, time of year. So for instance, we just got done with Christmas, right? Christmas was over yesterday. At this particular time of year, there are certain emotions that are stronger than in other times of year. Nostalgia, family, the idea of resolution, change is coming, right? When we come down to the end of the year. So all these emotions that we can tap, those are authentic for this particular time of year that may not be authentic in the middle of July or other times of year. So there are all these other factors that are kind of coming into play. But it requires us as a brand to not just understand what emotion we want someone to feel, but we understand what emotions they already feel. And it's not that we're shoving our brand into them, trying to get them to change their behavior and change the way that they feel because of something we've said, but because we understand them so well that we know where our brand fits into their lives, into the emotions that they already feel. We know what triggers those emotions, and then we tell stories that naturally do that.
Boy, that's you've got my brain just.
I know. So there's a lot kind of going on.
I think, though, it is amazing, though, that I think we get so caught up in as marketers that I don't know how many times I hear but what's the call to action, and what's the specific measurable thing that's going to result from this communication, and we get so caught up in it, in this whole idea of everything we do has to sell something.
That's right.
And and I'm a business person. You're a business person. We all know at the end of the day, all businesses exist to try and sell their products or services to the audience that needs them. And but the challenge, that doesn't mean it's this is where we get caught up with that whole problem of loyalty. People think that loyalty means you buy more stuff from me.
That's right. No,
love you, loyal customer. But if you're not buying stuff from me, you're not loyal.
Yeah.
So
loyalty is one of those sort of innate pieces, right? I mean, am I being a loyal customer if I buy a product and then I take a picture of it and put it up on Facebook and go, hey, look at what I just bought. This thing's really awesome. Yeah. I didn't buy from you again, but the story that I told on behalf of you may lead someone else to do so. So the idea of loyalty stretching horizontally rather than vertically, it's a longer life cycle, but that life cycle has stronger foundations to what you've got the capacity to do as an individual. And social really has given us a platform that we've never had before, right? I mean, I can speak to you about a particular brand or product or service in a way that I couldn't reach an audience the size that I have in a social environment otherwise. So, I mean, really great product reviews generate more business because I have an audience that I never had before. I mean, I could have walked out into the street 30 years ago and just said, hey, guys, I just bought this thing and nobody's going to care. But I can now post that to 300 Facebook friends, and now I've got a little bit more captive of an audience who is interested in what I have to say and will believe what I have to say as being authentic and true to me, not just selling a product.
So we're just to the last thing I want to chat with you a little bit about today, and this is as always marvelous talking with you. I love hearing where people get their inspiration from, because one of the things that I know in our world, our practice, we're in the insights business. You're really trying to bring something to your customers, to creative directors, designers, or whatever, that you hope helps them think differently about something. And we love studying culture just because we think that's, and observing what people do and how those systems influence people in the way subconsciously that they often don't know what to tell you, or it's very different than asking someone why they did something.
Exactly.
So where do you get your inspiration from for the stories that you tell?
Well, from a story standpoint, I mean, there's obviously so many different ways to tell stories, and you can fall straight to the mediums. I'm a movie guy. I love the cinema, and that's one particular way that story is communicated, right? There's lots of different ways in books and shows, and there's lots of different ways that we can take in story. But the telling of story is only really half that problem. The greater problem is what story to tell. And in order for you to understand what story to tell, you have to know people. You have to understand people. So my inspiration from a story standpoint has always come from people. I'm very much interested in behavioral anthropology. I'm very much interested, as you talked about, cultural systems, the things that lead people to do and think the way that they do and think, that sometimes are said and sometimes aren't said, but sometimes people understand about themselves and they don't. As you know, behavior is a true indicator of value systems, right? What we believe.
Right.
And understanding the behavior of people and why they behave certain ways, knowing something about who that person is beyond the demographic, especially in our industry from a marketing and advertising standpoint, we focus on demographics so heavily. We focus on age and we focus on gender. We focus on household income. We focus on all these things. That tells us a little bit about them. But what it's trying to get to is it's trying to set up an environment with which we understand why they do what they do, not just what they do, but why they do it. And so for a story standpoint, if I can understand the motivations of an audience, if I can understand what they love and what they fear, the two great motivations for all human endeavor, all human behavior, if I can understand those two things and get a little bit of a picture as to why they do what they do, why they think what they think, I can help form stories that immediately are relevant to them, that draw them in. And then the emotions that I incite through the context of that story, it isn't manipulative. It's value. They see it as something they want to feel. And if you think about it from a power standpoint, from a brand aspect, how powerful it would be to be able to understand our audience so well that we know what triggers certain emotions, and all we have to do is simply trigger them. And then our brand becomes the harbinger of that, the connective piece between a physical object and the way that I feel about something. And whether or not that the product actually creates that emotion is irrelevant. The brand helps to generate it. It's like watching Hallmark movies at Christmas time. Like, it doesn't even matter what the movie is, but you know you want to feel a certain way at Christmas time, and you know that those movies help you feel that certain way at Christmas time. Can a brand take that same position? Well, it can, if you'll understand why people behave the way they feel. So I get very inspired by human behavior. I get very inspired by digging into an audience and getting to know them beyond the demographic, so that I can find some germs, some triggers of things that make them feel a certain way. And then can I position my product, my brand, instead of me yelling my story from the rooftops and shoving my brand down their throat and trying to tell them all the great things that this brand is, understanding where the value of my brand fits in their daily lives, and then letting my story bubble up from the bottom up, from the person up, rather than the brand down. That's I mean, from at least from a storytelling standpoint, I get incredibly inspired there.
It struck me. You and I worked together on a number of projects, and I think one of the things that tends to be that I have loved about it is the way that we interact. It's not me presenting you a series of slides where I'm like, taking you through, this very logical and detailed thing. I think where it's been most effective for you and me has been just talking about it. And we always seem to have this moment where one of us says something, we're like, that's it.
And by one of us, I mean you, because it's not usually it's usually you.
No, but I think, and so I think if there's a really interesting perspective from a planner, and how we communicate with creative directors or designers, I think it's one of the things that can we bring more human conversations to it, and not make a PowerPoint presentation, but us tell that story. And us. I love this idea of, and you don't have to take it through the whole structure. You focus on the part of the story that really matters.
That's right.
But make sure you've got the rest of the story is understood.
That's right. Now, so, what I look for from you is I'm desperate for a hook, and I want I want that hook to be authentic. And you help me understand that. You help me go through from a demographic standpoint, breaking those audiences down into their behaviors to find that thing that triggers that emotion. And frankly, without it, I'm guessing. So I really have to dig in deep. So, I mean, I value our relationship in that way, probably more than anything else. That you just find this, you said this innate ability to find me a hook, find me the thing that is going to resonate with that audience. And then I can blow it out from there. I can decide how that story plays out. But without understanding the kernel, the heart of that story, I'm going to have to go searching for it.
Yeah. Makes it fun, doesn't it?
It does. It's one of my favorite things to do ever. It really is.
Yeah. So just to close up, one of the things I always like to ask, because we always get caught up in our business and branding and all that. Are you doing anything interesting outside of work that is a passion of yours, or just something fun you're really working on?
Outside of work, so I've written a couple of books, and I know it's shocking. I know. I'm working on a new book, tentatively titled "Think Like a Villain," and so it's this idea that we can learn an awful lot by the way historical villains in stories, approach goal setting, how they achieve their goals, their desire to sort of live on the periphery of something, and they're very aware of what the rules are and where they can break them. And creatively speaking, there's a lot of opportunity for us to take the best of the way that a villain approaches achieving their goals and applying it to our creative work. The only difference being that villains are typically willing to cross a line that as long as we're not willing to cross, there's a lot we can learn all the way up to that line. So I'm starting the research process and starting the writing process for this idea of a book called Think Like a Villain.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because when I think of villains, their one fatal flaw is like when they're dangling the hero over a pool of sharks and all that kind of stuff. They have to explain how they're going to die and how horrible it's going to be, and they're just giving them time to escape.
Yeah. No, it is. As maddening as it is for us, it's actually, if you think about it, again, going back to behavioral anthropology, right? Why they do what they do. Villains are incredibly creative, right? And when we develop a creative solution, when we have an idea, the first thing we want to do when we have a great idea is share it. We want the equity. We want the intelligence equity, right? We want people to know that is a great idea. You're incredibly creative. Villains have to live in this creative world that all they really want to do is share their idea. They want all the power and glory, but they want you to know, look what I did. That's why they have the monologue.
This is so awesome.
How creative they are. It's all actually quite human. It's all actually quite authentic.
Oh, Stefan, thank you so much for taking the time today.
My pleasure. Really.
Just to wrap up, 3 things that I took away from today as we think about telling stories is don't feel like you have to just follow a template.
That's right.
You need to understand the formula.
That's right.
But the second part is then focus on the part of the story that matters, and pay attention to that. But also think of the other things that are happening in your business and your brand, and make sure they are consistent along that whole story spectrum, so that when you tell one part of it, it fits with everything else.
That's correct. Yeah.
And then the third is if to be inspired to tell good stories, you've got to know what the right story is, and you do that by studying people and studying human nature.
That's right.
And it's not necessarily by asking them what they want, what they do, or whatever, but it's studying their lives and the things around them.
That's correct. So, you got it. It's good.
All right, man, it was awesome.
Great talking.
Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks. You too.